Hello, one and all. Welcome to the War Zone. I'm Scruffy, and this is Scruffy Tales. We're gonna take a look at why Pokrovsk will become Stalingrad 2025. We're gonna start off in Kursk, move down to Kharkiv and Kupiansk, and then we're gonna take a look at Pokrovsk. If you've watched my previous videos, you will, this is gonna be a lot of repetition. But I get the occasional new viewer, so I think it's time to highlight this once again. Why Pokrovsk will be Stalingrad 2025, what the Russians are up to, and why Ukraine can win the war in Pokrovsk. Right, so not much to report this morning on Kursk at least. um, Things appear to be static at the moment, apart from Ukraine gaining access to Dorino, having pushed in here with tanks into this part of town along this road here, into these woods, and taking command more than likely of these buildings here. This obviously endangers the Russians holding the factory or farm or warehouses. If Ukraine can push in this way, as you can see, it's not that far, it's not many obstacles to overcome in order to isolate Russians in the warehouses. And that might be what Ukraine is after, and then they can establish a substantial foothold in Dorino and might be pushing northward towards this crossing point. Interesting though, speaking of crossing points, we don't see Russia. We saw Russia making moves up to the river Snaist over here, but they haven't gone any further, and kind of suggests that maybe Ukraine has blown up this bridge, so Russia cannot cross here in towards Nikolaevo Darino. Up here, however, as you can see, it's hard to blow up, bit of land here, and there's probably something similar going on up here. And the same thing here at Nizhny Klin, I mean, land bridge, right? So this is the reason why I think Russia pushed in at the Reno and why they have tried to move down from Selenischliak towards Nizhny Klin. This stretch here is where they have lost so many vehicles, the Russians, failing in pushing in towards Nizhny Klin from the north. And I think that might indicate that this bridge is actually blown up. Apart from that, not much. Still no confirmation if Russia has indeed taken all of the territory east of the River Pesel. It's not unlikely that they have managed to do it, but still no proper confirmation. From ISW, I should add. I'm kind of waiting for ISW to confirm the Russian claims before we make any changes on my map. But that's Kursk. Not much going on down here north of Kharkiv. We have Ukraine pushing into Hyboki, should be added. They appear to have pushed into these buildings, being a threat to this part of the western outskirts. And it's not unlikely that Ukraine has also managed to push up this way and forced Russia back into town. So Ukraine is now in control of the western slopes of this massive hill. And we have also seen Ukraine pushing up in this valley, this bowl-shaped valley here, making their way to this part. And if they manage to reach here, they have essentially cut off the Russians in this valley from support. Because in this valley here, this is the western slopes right here. Wide open territory here at the bottom of the hill with a river. And so bringing in troops this way is a no-go for Russians. They are easy targets. And we have already seen Russian vehicles being destroyed down here on the low ground. So Russia needs to come in through here or through here where they have cover to support this bowl-shaped valley. And Ukraine, as you can see, Ukraine wants to move up along the ridge here to cut off the Russians at this point and isolate the valley. But it's slow going. This is really slow going. barely any advances at all. But when there are advances, it is Ukraine that is pushing forward. Yeah, I haven't mapped out the Kupiansk area, but up here the Russians have been forced back, and down here they are now stuck. Right here, there's a narrow stretch of dry land between the river and the cliffs. They can't really push northward because then they run into the town of Dvorichna, or Rakovo, I should say. And this is easily defended by Ukraine. Same going south, open land, open territory, easy to direct attacks against Russians trying to come south. So Russia can't really move this way. They seem to be in control of this valley. This is a very steep valley along these cliffs, and this is where Russia has set up positions, would be my guess. But I mean, they can't really move out because Ukrainians are in complete control of these open fields. So Russians are, by the looks of it, still located here but can't move any further. It is, of course, a nuisance for the Ukrainians, and they have to box the Russians in, and this draws supplies, resources, manpower away from the real fight at Kupiansk, which appears to be the whole point of making this crossing. This is essentially the Russian version of Krynki. Same deal, you cross the body of water, hold a small piece of terrain, and that forces the enemy to waste resources on this small fight when they really want to ship everything down to the larger fight down here. And now we're gonna move down to, take a look at this, Pokrovsk. And what the hell is all of this? Well, let's first start off with, like I always point out, here we have Avdiivka. 14 months ago, Russia began the assault on Avdiivka, and in 14 months, Russia has grabbed all of this territory here, from Vuhledar to Velikonovsilka, from Marinka to Krakova, and from Avdiivka all the way to the outskirts of Shevchenko. 14 months, and they have now secured territory that's not even the size of Luxembourg, this tiny country in the middle of Europe. 14 months, and this is a slow crawl. This is not a collapse. Ukraine is falling back in orderly fashion, and it is a defense at depth. So what is happening as of late? Well, what we have seen is that Russia moved into Rodivka and Novorodivka and Krasny Yar, and they have now set up positions outside of Mirnorad, and they're just waiting for the moment to move into the town. They are not ready yet, because if they do it now, they will be destroyed within Mirnorad. That is why they're waiting here. They have since then moved south and secured this highway to Selidove. So this is a supply route, this green dotted line. They have a supply route here from Donetsk to Rodivka, from Donetsk now to Selidove, and they are now moving towards this road here that is currently a Ukrainian supply line, but it's been cut at Novorossiysk. So when Russia has pushed out west and taken control of it, they have another supply route from Donetsk to Andrivka and up to Novorossiysk and Shevchenko. So these three supply routes are necessary for Russia to support their artillery and their troops as they're moving into Pokrovsk proper. Crucially, they are now at Shevchenko, and Shevchenko will be the bridgehead into Pokrovsk. From here, they can move into this area here. So lots of cover, good positions where they can set up, where they can mount their assault, gather troops, and then push across these fields, fight their way through the windbreaks, and push up along the railroad here into Novopavlivka and then into Pokrovsk itself. From Shevchenko, they can reach Peshane and push out towards Kotline and cut these Ukrainian supply lines marked with white dotted lines. So, as you can see, Russia is setting things up. They are preparing the board for the eventual assault by having Mykolaiivka here as an assault point, having Shevchenko as an assault point, and now they are pushing here into Novotroitske to secure the supply line from Andriivka up to Novotroitske, and this also gives them a good chance as pushing in here and then pushing up towards Urdachne and cut more Ukrainian supply lines. So what is it that I marked? I marked with the yellow dotted line is like the perimeter defense of Pokrovsk. It should have included Novorodivka, Krutiyar, Krasnyar, and Rodivka, but as we know, Russia pushed in this way and cut through the perimeter defense. I have also marked with purple here, purple pinkish, additional defensive positions. Very defendable. Here you have a factory, slag heaps. Here you have some smaller towns to the north defending these northern supply routes. These windbreaks here will probably be trench lines more or less with bunkers. And here I marked this area because here you have the Solona River in a small valley. So this here is a upward going hill. This is the valley and this is this upward going slope, I should say. So here is the top of the slope and this is the slope down into the valley. So high ground that favors Ukrainian defenders. And once you get up on the high ground, you have this town, Udachne, and here you have more Ukrainian supply lines. But if Russia gets up here and denies Ukraine the use of these supply lines, the railroad here with the thick forest belt, together with the Udachne, together with this factory here and this small village Kotline, becomes a potent defensive line on top of the hill above the slopes. So, as you can see, Russia is pushing in here towards Novosilivka, and then they may try and reach Udachne, but behind Udachne you have a large factory again. So yes, Russia may reach this point and cut these supply lines, but I doubt they will be able to move beyond this point and reach these northern supply lines. So Udachne may be the furthest extent of the Russian advance, and then they will be ready to launch an assault, or they will be forced to launch an assault because they can't move further north to endanger these supply routes. But before that happens, Ukraine, or Russia I should say, they want the territory here south of this river here marked with blue, Solona River, so that they can set up artillery pieces all around Pokrovsk and Mirnorod and hammer Ukrainian positions. And in order to do that, they need to control all of this territory here. And this is the slow going part. Yes, they have had successes here after Vuhledar and taken this territory in relative short order. But now they seem to be stuck on Velika Novosilka. We see Ukraine have made counter moves in Novye Komar and Rozdolne, according to ISW. So out on these wide open steppes, these towns are now become fortresses, or forts rather, out on the plains that Ukraine need to hold in order to prevent further Russian advances. And as we see, you have multiple locations like these that will act as forts out on the steppes as Russia is moving north towards Pokrovsk to be able to set up artillery in this area here. So Russia will not be ready to attack Pokrovsk until they have gained all of the territory here, south and east of this river. And when they have all of that, that is when they can make the move from Shevchenko and Krasnoyar into Myrnorad and Pokrovsk. And why is this? Why is Russia taking all this time to prepare for the assault on Pokrovsk? Well, if you watched my previous videos talking about Pokrovsk, you know why. We're going to make a move over here and travel back in time when Volgograd was known as Stalingrad. And this is, of course, when the Russians, when the Germans came in towards Stalingrad and went straight for the town, pushed into town, cut the supplies from the south, cut the supplies from the north, and basically pushed the Russians all the way back to the shores of the river. But Russia held on because they had one tiny sliver of a supply route crossing the river and supplying the forces with manpower, equipment, ammunition, and what have you. And that allowed the Russians to hold the line within the city. And eventually, they built up a big force north of the Germans that could then attack and come down here from the north and cut through the German lines, and which ended up surrounding and isolating Germans within Stalingrad. Right? So this is what the Russians at Pokrovsk are trying to avoid. They don't want a narrow approach that Ukraine can move and cut off. They want to expand their hold around Pokrovsk so that Ukraine can't move in with a lightning attack and isolate Russian forces within Myrnorad and Pokrovsk. And also, Russia knows, as long as there is a tiny logistical route, Ukraine stands a chance of holding their ground within Pokrovsk and Myrnorad. So this is why Russia is moving this way to cut all of these supply routes, and they want to move past Udachne to reach Ryshine and these supply routes if possible. And maybe we will see them try and push north here as well to reach the supply route coming in from the north. So that's what's going on here. That's why they weren't just going to be attacking this way through Rodivka straight into town, because then Ukraine could have moved up and cut them off and trapped them within Myrnorad. And also, if this was all they had, I mean, imagine placing a couple of 50,000 troops in this small area together with 5,000 artillery pieces with only this narrow supply route leading to the front lines. It would have been so easy for Ukraine to annihilate the Russians and trap them in Myrnorad. No. The Russians, they're playing it smart. They are securing one supply route after the other. Goddamn cough. And when they took Krasnoyar, they secured a breach point into Myrnorad. They're now moving around to take Shevchenko, to secure a breach point into Pokrovsk. And their next objective after Shevchenko is, my guess, trying to reach Udachne to cut these three supply lines in full and be in a position to probably move through Kotlina and move up this way towards the outskirts of Pokrovsk, and here cut these two supply lines. There's no point in going through this factory because it's too far and you want to cut the supply lines here. You want to move up this way here where you can cut both of these supply lines right here in this area here. So Russia's plan is probably try and reach the Udachne and then move through Kotlina up this way into this area here. Will they succeed? I doubt it. I don't think Russia will be able to push through this defensive position here as well as Kotlina and the railroad here. I think this will hold. This will be too much for the Russians. And this is also why I think Ukraine's plan is to destroy the Russians in Pokrovsk. They are fighting a deliberate defense at depth. They're not trying to hold every piece of terrain until the last man dies. They're fighting for as long as they want, killing as many enemies as possible in that time, and then they fall back to another defensive position, rinse and repeat, and they are slowly whittling down the Russians. I mean, the Russians a few months ago took 40,000 casualties in a single month, and that should tell us something about how effective the Ukrainian defense is. And then they fall back to reduce their own casualties and rinse and repeat and continue doing this until we will end up in a situation where Russia has reached this river and are ready to try and make a move on the Dutch net. They are ready to move through Shevchenko towards Pokrovsk, through Krasny Yar towards Myrnrad. And at that point, the Ukrainian defense will have whittled down the Russian army to such an extent that entering Pokrovsk and Myrnrad might actually destroy the Russian army in its entirety. Because in here, Russia needs a 10-to-1 advantage in manpower to defeat the enemy. And after 14 months, this is going to take how long? 6 months before they can push up all the way here. Does Russia have enough troops? I mean, we are beginning to see reports that they're now losing more troops that they can recruit, right? So they can't fill the gaps anymore. And by the time they're ready to move in, Myrnrad and Pokrovsk will be death traps. And I'm thinking Ukraine's plan is to lure Russia into Pokrovsk and Myrnrad. They don't mind losing terrain here. This terrain can be lost as long as they're trading territory for kills. It's up here where they can't lose territory. Udachne, they cannot let the Russians pass Udachne and Kotlyne. If they can hold here, and if they can hold here, Russia can enter Pokrovsk and Myrnrad and be destroyed. That is what I think is the Ukrainian plan. They will annihilate the Russians in Pokrovsk. Likewise, I think the Russians knows this is an issue and that this is a possibility. So the Russians realize that Ukraine is gambling on winning the war in Pokrovsk. So Russia knows if they can win at Pokrovsk, they will in turn have destroyed the Ukrainian army and can push through Pokrovsk and reach Dnipro. So both sides are gambling that they will destroy the enemy army within these two cities. That is how crucial and how massive this battle here in Pokrovsk and Myrnrad will be, is my guess. This will be the battle that decides everything if the war continues and peace talks fail. Potential peace talks fail in 2025. And as we see how Russia loses its artillery advantage, we see that Ukraine, for every killed Ukrainian soldier, Russia has lost 4.6 of their own. I mean, that is without entering these cities. That is with Avdiivka, with Bakhmut, with Volchansk, Chasiv Yar. And, of course, the slow 14 months advancing through these steps. When we begin in Pokrovsk and Myrnrad, Russia will have lost the artillery advantage. Russia will not be able to recruit enough troops to fill the gaps in their lines. Ukraine will still be holding on to territory in Kursk. This will draw vast amount of resources from the Russians that they would have rather used in Pokrovsk, including elite airborne and marine infantry that are used here in Kursk instead. So that is why I believe that Ukraine are fine with losing territory here. They will draw the Russians in, killing them every step of the way. And then when Russia moves into Pokrovsk and Myrnrad, the real battle begins that will be able to decide the war and allow Ukraine to win and crush the Russian army. And we're gonna return briefly to Kursk here because one of the reasons why the Ukrainians are having success in Kursk currently is because of this vehicle, the PBV 302, an old Swedish APC that has been delivered to Ukraine recently. And they, as you can see on the rightmost image, they have modified it with the cope cages to deal with drones and incoming RPG rounds. And according to eyewitness reports, these vehicles have no issues traversing snow, mud, difficult terrain. I mean, we already know this. This is the track record from Sweden, but now we're seeing them on the front line within Russia proper, and it holds true. They can maneuver through any and all types of terrain, and this gives Ukraine a massive advantage because Russian vehicles and other vehicles does not have this level of mobility. This gives Ukraine a tactical advantage in Kursk. They can move troops to where they're needed without issue, and they can supply those troops by filling these vehicles up with ammunition, food, weapons, and they can medevac troops from the front line easily enough with these vehicles as well, because they can traverse any type of terrain out there. So Swedish PBV 302s are providing a massive tactical advantage to the Ukrainians within Russia against the Russians. So right now we have PBV 302s, CV90, the STRF 9040 more specifically, and Swedish main battle tank, the STRV 122. All of these vehicles are deployed in Russia, in Kursk, and helping Ukraine take the fight to the fascists in Moscow and putting pressure on the Russian army within Russia itself. Quite incredible. And it should tell you something about the capabilities of these Swedish vehicles, as they have been chosen to take part in this daring operation within Russia. And on top of that, we have also learned that in 2025, Ukraine will receive a total of 40 CV9035NL, a very advanced version of the CV90 with a 35mm chain gun. It has 2 anti-tank guided missiles. It has active protection system that can blast incoming RPGs, drones, and anti-tank guided missiles with massive shotgun shells, basically. And it has state-of-the-art armor protection and everything. It's a beast of a vehicle, and Ukraine will receive 40 of them sometime during 2025. So, without a doubt, Swedish vehicles, Swedish armor, they're put to the test, and they have proven themselves as as some of the most capable platforms on the planet. And Russia is really feeling the destructive power of these Swedish vehicles. And speaking of Swedish vehicles, I found these guys last night, totally tanked. A couple of Aussies down under talking about various tanks throughout history. And in this video in particular, they are talking about the CV90 because there is a light tank version of the CV90 with a 120mm gun. So that's why they're talking about the CV90 and the CV90 family. And they have a live stream and an audio version of that live stream. And they're talking like for hours on end about various stuff. But first half is definitely CV90 related. So I want to give a shout out to these guys. Take a look, listen to what they have to say. They have some interesting pointers about this awesome vehicle, the CV90. So head on over there and give them a subscribe, because they're really close to 1,000 subscribers. And well, that's going to have to be it. Ukraine appears to, at the moment, hold the line up in Kursk. Probably because they get a lot of support now from attacking, striking the Russians behind the front line, far away from the fighting, destroying and disrupting Russian troops before they even reach the front line. And it's winter. Russia's having problem maneuvering. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians have PBV 302s that allows them to maneuver. And of course, down in Pokrovsk, I think Ukraine is actually onto something. I think Ukraine is intentionally drawing Russia in, whittling them down as they go, and preparing for this big final battle in Pokrovsk, where they hope to utterly crush the Russian army. Anyway, that's gonna have to be it. Hope I'll see you in the next one. As always, go på marsch, Ukraine, and give them hell.